on that design build versus, bringing a project team together.
Right.
You have experience from some, other design build firms, working for them, designing for them.
Right.
Talk to me about the positives and negatives of a design build firm.
I'll start with the positives. I think the positives are you're under one roof. And so the communication between the design team and the construction team is pretty much seamless because everyone's literally 5 feet away. They're seeing each other every day. It's very easy to coordinate all of the project details between those two parties. So that works really well. I think that it depends on, some of the negatives are that it depends on the culture of that company. And if it's a construction-based company and they just happen to have in-house architects and designers, they may be prioritizing money and not prioritizing eco-friendly building or really cool architectural design or whatever. And so what I've run into in the past is that when money is the primary objective, everything else falls to the wayside. So the cool designs never make it into the actual built world. The gross profit margin is high for the company, but who's really benefiting from that? Probably not the client, probably not the designers. It's not as fun of a place to work when that's the primary culture. Not that everyone doesn't need to make a living and that the business needs to be profitable. Of course it does. But to what point, to what extent? So I think the culture can play into that. And then, I haven't had any experience where the design build company was run by designers and architects and they're bringing in the construction side because maybe the priority is different there.
Yeah.
I would think it would be, but I don't really know because I just haven't crossed paths with that.
I think there's a catch-22 there because if it's architects and designers, they're more interested in their design, and oftentimes the budgets don't match.
Right.
And so you're like, oh, well, we're gonna try and build this.
Right.
And then they're like, oh, they don't last long because they realize it's expensive to build.
Right.
And they're like, why are my ideas so expensive?
Yeah.
It's because you have a Skyhook in there.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, and just generally, this is one thing, like HGTV and those kind of shows, for example, I have a love-hate relationship with. Like, yes, they're showing off cool things, but it's so far from reality for what things actually cost to build. And so people get these totally wrong notions of what they can do. Like, oh, I have $20,000. I can do an addition and remodel my kitchen and do all this stuff. And it's like, no, you need $320 to do that.
Exactly.
And the reason that it works on HGTV is because they have corporate underwriting. Some appliance company comes in and supplies all the appliances. They sponsor the cabinetry, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so the cost per square foot is like, a fraction of what it is in the real world.
It is something that we get up or, bang our heads up against, but it's education.
Right.
And that's part of what we do.
Exactly.
So, but that is interesting on the design build side. Losing some of the design from the architectural or interior designer's perspective with a design build firm.
Right.
And I think sometimes it could pigeonhole the project into a certain style.
For sure.
And so that's why we've chosen to really say, hey, we worked with 11 different architects in the past 2 years.
Right.
And we really pride ourselves in that. And also it gives us a breadth of experience.
Yeah.
To be able to put all these different designs, all the different engineering, the cabinet, the kitchen ideas that we'll come up with. You're like, oh, really? Okay, so we're going to do a solid surface refrigerator surround with waterfall edges.
Right.
Huh. Okay. I probably wouldn't have seen that working with just one designer all the time.
Right, exactly.
So you get to do some pretty interesting and crazy stuff, which is fun.
Yeah, the diversity is good. And I think also the other negative with design build is that it's typically more expensive. So if you work with a contractor who is competitively bidding stuff, then they're going to be more cost competitive. The design build folks are usually like, here's what your design fee is going to be, here's what your project cost is going to be, and that's it.
Yeah.
You're locked into that. And that can be good for some people, like there's usually more overhead, but that also equals a very managed process, which some people love. So I think you have to choose your fit.
Because there is. It can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
And they're just like, we want a one-stop shop.
Exactly.
Coming out of the Marshall fires, we offered a design process where we brought in partner architects that said they would commit to us just because everybody was getting busy.
Right.
And we said, okay, hey, we have a process for you where, let's make it easier on you to get your house rebuilt.
Yep.
So we were able to do that. And so that was nice.
Yeah, that's great. So, it was a great opportunity to implement that.
Yeah. With your projects at Skyhook, what would you say percentage-wise of your projects is remodel addition versus new homes versus, your cabinet offering?
Gotcha. So I would say we always have 2 or 3 cabinetry type remodel related projects kind of floating around that we're working on. Usually it's a kitchen or something like that. So there's always a few of those in the works. And then the rest of it is typically medium to larger scale remodels, which may include additions and may not.
Yeah.
It could be just gutting the interior and redoing that without any sort of additions. It could be gutting the interior, doing an addition off the back, maybe doing a pop top. So those are the most typical projects, I would say. And then the cabinetry gets tied in kind of depending on the project type and what the client's expectations are and the contractor that we end up working with, that sort of thing. And then we also have maybe 10 to 30% of light commercial type projects that get mixed in too.
Okay.
Things like tenant finishes. I've got a project in Broomfield right now that's an addition to a church. Yeah. But these are pretty simple commercial type projects. So there's always a few of those in the mix, but everything kind of roller coasters, sometimes we'll have 10 cabinetry projects and no big remodels. Yeah. Sometimes we'll have 3 big remodels and just 1 or 2 cabinetry type projects floating around. And new houses is something that I probably enjoy the most, but we don't get a lot of those, maybe 1 or 2 every couple years. Yeah. Land's expensive. There's so many restrictions on what you can and can't do. You have to have a lot of money, especially in Boulder County, to build a new house. So if you're not a millionaire, it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, I see some of your target market is, out in Westminster and Arvada, right? I mean, because it's a little more affordable out there.
Yeah, exactly.
So I see, that's definitely in our geographic area, a great next place, and it's happening, but, I think there's a lot more remodel addition because it's becoming just a more affordable and cool place in our area. So that's pretty cool. Yeah,
I mean, Denver's gone crazy. Unfortunately, the building department in Denver is difficult and time-consuming and very expensive for a homeowner to pay someone like me to get their project through the process. But some of the smaller places like, Arvada, Old Town Arvada has gotten quite expensive, actually. And there's tons of opportunities. They redid the little sort of downtown area there really nicely. So there's little pockets in the Denver metro area that are pretty cool and pretty fun to work on. Yeah. And they're easier building departments to deal with.
So over the last 5 years, what's one of your most exciting projects that you've done?
Good question.
And then exciting why?
Right.
Because it doesn't need to be, it was a $100 million X.
Right. Yeah, we've had some fun new home projects in the mountains. We had one in a small town outside of Colorado Springs, which was fun. And the guy had initially come to us with kind of a prefab barn-looking metal building design. You can go online and buy these plans for pre-manufactured stuff, and it was a horrendous looking structure. And I was able to talk him out of it. And you'll spend a little bit more money doing something more custom, but it's just going to be night and day a better project for you at the end of the day. So that one was fun. And then we
did it still look like a barn dominium type project?
No. We did a more of a site built wood frame,
okay.
Nicely designed house with better insulation and, just everything about it's better, basically. And then we had another project a couple years ago in Evergreen up in the mountains that was a really fun mountain project. So it's just a different type of building up there. Yeah. So that was enjoyable. And then we had one in Boulder that was really interesting. It probably took 3+ years from the time we started designing it to the time it was finished. But it was on North Street, just a couple blocks south of North Boulder Park. And it was an older turn-of-the-century home, probably one of the first ones in that neighborhood. I think it was built in 1895 or something like that. So it had no foundation. It was a real beater. We started off just trying to remodel it, but everything that got opened up, it was a horror show. So they had done an addition to it probably in the 60s, like an upper story addition. And so what we ended up doing is jacking up, and because of the way the zoning laws changed over the years, you wouldn't be able to build the addition that they had built in the 60s anymore because it was a really narrow lot. So like the crazy setbacks that the city has, you'd have you'd have an 11-foot wide house basically. Yeah. So if we tore this addition down, we couldn't rebuild it. So what we did was jacked it up, demoed everything underneath, dug a full basement, and then built up underneath to support that addition. So that was cool. We put a rooftop deck on it because he has these great views of Mount Sanitas and that whole area. So that ended up being a really fun project. And I kind of lean more towards, or maybe enjoy more, the smaller, high quality projects than the gigantic square footage houses that just end up having white box syndrome. Like there's no money left, so you get carpet and white paint, and it's 6,000 square feet, but there's nothing nice or interesting in it. Yeah. This house was probably more like 1,800 square feet and very nice.
On our remodel addition restoration, I enjoy that. That makes it so much more enjoyable. This is my saying is I don't want to go take a farm and build 100 boxes.
Right.
Doesn't interest me.
Right.
Interest me is taking the old, making it new, making it personalized, and also the fun, big custom homes.
Right.
I mean, those are always, icing on the cake.
Absolutely.
And so, but yeah, I think, working in the municipalities that we work in, Boulder, unincorporated Boulder County. I think you do have some limitations.
Yeah. And
being able to renew the old, I just enjoy more.
For sure. Yeah. And there's a lot of great opportunities, houses that can be magical once they're redone.
Yeah.
So
let's shift a little bit to your core values of building better, building with better sustainable products. Talk to me about what motivates you and how you incorporate that into your projects with your clients.
Right. So that's an interesting question. And it's something that I struggle with quite a bit because anytime you start to talk about sustainability, you're kind of butting up against societal ideas at large, I think. What does sustainability actually mean? Is it having exterior finishes on your house that are no maintenance, that you don't have to come back and repaint every 5 years? Is it the embedded energy costs in the materials that produce the house, like concrete and steel and wood? Is it having low energy overhead, like incorporating wind or solar power into the home? Is it about having really great insulation and high efficiency HVAC systems? There's so many different categories. Is it indoor air quality? Like, do you want to have low VOC paint and carpet and, things like that?
Formaldehyde free.
Yeah, exactly. So I think people have to pick and choose where their priorities are. And I feel like there's an educational process that goes along with that for the client. But what I fight against is just, Americans are obsessed with price. And that seems to be the overarching factor most of the time. And so that's what I'm fighting against. Like, okay, you could do a luxury vinyl tile floor, but there's nothing sustainable about that. It's made from petroleum products. It has a limited lifespan. As soon as you wear through the decorative layer on top, you see whatever the core is. It'll probably have to get ripped out in 10 to 15 years. It's not sustainable. Yeah. But it looks nice when it goes in, and it's durable, and it's affordable. But is it as nice as a hardwood oak floor? No. Is it as nice as maybe a marmoleum type product that actually has real sustainable materials used in it that will last, 2 or 3 times as long? Yeah, it's a better product, but it costs more money. And so I try to tell people, like, you have to prioritize where you want your sustainability money to go to. And I'm just trying to get them to spend money on sustainability.
Yeah.
Basically. Now, the building code has forced our hand in a lot of this. Like,
Which is good.
Good. Like, you have to do a certain level of insulation. You have to do, certain energy efficient appliances, that sort of thing, which makes a lot of sense. And they, reward you in a sense for doing that. Like, oh, you're going to put in a solar array? Okay, well, we'll maybe let you slide in a couple other areas. Yeah. So that's good. But, it's an ongoing struggle to kind of get people to respond the way you want them to.
So what would you say are your top two when you walk into a remodel outside of code that you're like, man, I wish they would want to invest their money into this?
So I probably lean more towards energy efficiency, taking advantage of good energy sources, indoor air quality, things like that.
So those would be three. Indoor air quality, I think, is so important.
Yeah.
It'd be great if we could, in every remodel, put in an ERV into their home.
For sure.
And then high efficiency. I think we're forced to be there now through the code. So that's not as much of a choice for our clients anymore.
Right.
And in Boulder County, I think it's much easier to be able to have the clients want to spend that. I think there's a cultural idea about that.
Right.
Now we get into the other counties, it gets more difficult. Of course, the equity in their properties aren't the same sometimes when we get into these, remodels. So they're like, hey, I got X amount. I need more space for my family.
Right.
I don't want to move. How do I make this better for a budget?
Right.
And that's where, we try, with the architect, with the energy auditor and, the builder on product selections, to be able to say, hey, okay, here's a good compromise.
Right.
This is going to be better. This is going to be better for your house. It's not going to break the bank, but you may not be able to get everything you want.
Right, for sure. Yeah, I think HVAC is probably a big component. So you can always incorporate indoor air quality into that, but also just having heating and cooling happening in an efficient way. And I think we're probably not that far away from everything shifting to electric, especially here. You have solar panels on the roof. It's overproducing for the needs of the home. You can do electric on-demand hot water heating. You can even have an electric forced air furnace if you want, or you could switch over to more of a heat pump type system. There are technologies moving forward in those areas that I think will make all of that stuff easier.
Yeah.
And, like I recently remodeled my kitchen and put in an induction cooktop. Yeah. And so many people are like, oh, I love cooking on gas cooktops, blah, blah, blah. You get so much control. And I'm like, yeah, induction is the only way to go.
Yeah.
Once you go there, you never look back. Water boils in like 20 seconds. Like,
it's just easier.
Right.
Yeah.
It's easy to clean. You don't have the noxious combustion gases coming off of natural gas. Like, yes, natural gas burns clean, but it's still a fossil fuel and there's still toxic stuff coming from that combustion. Yeah. So that doesn't help indoor air quality. It detracts from it. So I think we'll all be shifting more towards that electric driver for all of our sort of interior, mechanics, basically. Yeah. Which is good.
Yeah. We were able to do several all-electric homes coming out of the Marshall Fire.
Right.
And, you hope that there's still some costly times for being all electric. If your heat pump doesn't sustain at the cold temperatures, you got supplemental electric backup.
Right.
That gets very costly to run.
For sure.
But can you offset those costs with your solar and any battery storage? So I think some municipalities have forced it too early, where some of the technology isn't quite there. I think that as the equipment gets better, as the electric engineering of residential properties gets more professional,
right,
where we can be smarter breakers, smarter panels, better, lighting control systems. I think that's going to make it better.
Yeah.
I grew up in an all electric house coming out of the 70s.
Okay.
It was a passive solar.
Right.
Oh my goodness. Electric rates shot through the roof.
Right.
My dad was like, you can't even pay the electric bill this month because we had the electric baseboard heaters.
Right.
And, sure, we had upgraded insulation, but from then it's probably like an R13
right
back then.
Right.
And so it was an interesting way to live, but at that time it was the rest of the market wasn't there.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't a sustainable aspect. And
Right.
then, you can't control the rates of electrical.
Right.
So,
Well, that's a good point because I don't see as much passive solar as I think I would like.
yeah.
And Colorado is a great place to do that. And it can be done in a way that looks nice, that isn't these like ugly things from the 70s. But in the 70s, they figured out how to do all that stuff. Like I have some great energy design books that are, 40 and 50 years old, where they figured out how to design stuff. So, okay, these are the sun angles you need, and this is the square footages you need, and this is the thermal mass you need, and it's all been done. I'd like to see a resurgence in that.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of the 70s home, with all the remodel that we do here, oftentimes we're removing the heat sink walls. We're removing the solar heat gain windows because it's hard to control.
Right.
So I think that, the growth from it is a passive design.
Right.
Where you are creating that building envelope that you can control much more effectively and efficiently.
Exactly.
But it's free heat.
Right. It's free heat.
But too much of it isn't good.
No, for
and
sure.
that's what we were getting,
For sure.
In the summertime. You're like, wow, how do we, you got quilts on the windows because you're trying to keep the heat out.
Right.
But no, I think that using our natural resources, like the geothermal systems we get to install, and that's free energy.
Yep.
It's not cost effective right now.
Right.
And then free energy from the sun.
Right.
I don't know about wind. I've gone to the trade shows where they have these, individual wind farms that you put in your backyard. It's like this, cool little thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
But, that's free energy production.
Yeah. I mean, in some places it works. Like if you live in rural North Boulder and you have 20 acres and you can have a tower with a small wind turbine on it, that's not a bad thing to have.
Yeah.
You can easily tie that back into either battery storage or into your electric grid system.
Yeah.
But you can't do that in most places. And there's no way an
HOA.
Yeah. Suburban
Please.
neighborhoods, there's a no-go.
It's not going to happen.
If you lived in a multifamily building in downtown Denver that is 20 stories, like there's wind turbines that can spin at any speed. So there's no maximum velocity. In fact, they need a certain speed to get going, but you could fill the rooftop of that and just have this constant electricity source. Why isn't that happening?
Yeah, that's because it's full of solar panels.
Yeah.
That are out of date now.
Well, yeah, exactly. Or it's got a pool that no one swims in or whatever. But there's just opportunities for that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But all that technology is moving forward. And I think in our lifetime, we'll see that become more commonplace.
Yeah. Brendan, what I want to do is I want you to take me through your process that you take your clients through. Just kind of talk me through the steps that when they come to you and say, hey, I'm thinking about X.
Right.
Tell me your thought process, your guiding of your clients.
Gotcha. So typically I will do a site visit to meet with the client on site, walk through their house, their project, whatever it is they're contemplating working on, talk about their ideas, their budget, make sure that, it's the right fit for us, it's the right fit for them, that sort of thing. If all that looks good, we have them sign a design agreement and take a deposit, and then we get started in the design process. And so I'll describe to them the design process that I'm describing to you, basically. But we start by doing as-built measurements of their project, and then the next step is to get into the 3D model. So we pretty much 3D computer model whatever we're going to be working on.
What technology are you doing that in? What application?
It's pretty much SketchUp and Photoshop, essentially. Okay. So that seems to be the easiest, fastest 3D tool that I've used. I used to use one called FormZ, which was really good, but SketchUp has so many library items you can grab. So toilets, sinks, cabinets, doors, stairs, whatever building component you want, someone's made it, and it's kind of all accessible mostly for free online. So it's a great resource tool. And then it's a fun, fast process. People love that. And they're blown away by the technology. They're like, wow, I didn't even know that there was programs that could do this. And I'm like, yeah, I'm amazed by it every time I work on it. Truly, it's pretty technologically amazing. So we'll do all of the conceptual design with the computer model. And then I try to model everything as accurately as possible so that once we're done with the conceptual design process, I can just take that computer model and slice it up and export that into the actual construction drawing, like AutoCAD type software where we are generating the construction drawings from. And then once we have that, that's when we're working on the permit submittal for the city, doing the structural engineering, all of the drawings associated with that, plans, elevations, that sort of thing. And then once we have the construction drawings and the structural engineering done, we submit for permit. And we're basically trying to have the client start with us, and by the time they're done with us, they have they have a design they're happy with, a full set of construction drawings, and an approved building permit for wherever city they're located. And then at that point, they can step into the construction world and get the project built.
So when you're bringing them through that design process, when do you bring a builder in or a contractor to them, or sometimes they have contractors,
right?
But at what point do you think it's the most valuable to bring in a contractor?
I think it's pretty valuable earlier on, especially if the budget is kind of unknown. But from a design standpoint, the worst position I can put myself in, and also the client, is to design something they can't afford. So I'm really cognizant of that. So if someone comes to me and they're like, hey, I have $300K and I want to do a complete remodel, but we're not doing any additions, and the house isn't that big, I pretty much know that that's a possibility, and that whatever design we come up with will most likely fit within that budget.
Yeah.
If someone's like, hey, I want to build a new house and I have $600K to work with, but I want a 6,000 square foot house, I'm like, yeah, okay.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah, not going to happen. Something either needs to change here, or we need to bring in a contractor right away to give us feedback on the cost, true construction costs, so that we're designing for something that client can afford. So personally, I like to have the feedback from the builder sooner rather than later, but it really depends on the client and on the project.
Yeah. Because I think we've seen it so many times where a potential client will bring us fully designed architecture, everything.
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, I'm getting ready to talk to builders now. And my architect said I could build this for X.
Right.
And then we start looking through the plans and we're like, go back to your architect and tell him to build it for X then, because there's no way that we can do it.
Right.
Right. So it's great when we can get in earlier on.
Yeah.
So oftentimes what we like to do is when we're working with the architects is say, hey, we want to come and do a conceptual pricing off your conceptual plans.
Right.
Let's really just break this down and through and, say, okay, here's all the costs. Let's look at the municipalities. What are the other crazy things they're going to have us do throughout the build process?
Right.
And really come up with a good conceptual estimate before you go into the design phase.
Right.
Because then, through the design phase, it's going to proof the concept.
Right.
Or it's going to shift it and it's not too late.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the perfect scenario.
Yeah.
For sure.
And so it's bringing in the build team earlier in the process is going to help the expectations throughout be more enjoyable for the client.
Right.
So
exactly.
That's key.
Yeah, no, that's the right approach for sure.
Yeah.
And more often than not, that's the approach we like to take. And that's typically what happens.
Yeah.
And it's weird too, because I think most people would assume that a client who comes in and spends money with an architect to design a project, that project is like guaranteed to get built.
Yeah.
But that isn't actually the case. Like I would say maybe 15 to 30% of projects don't really get built for one reason or another.
Yeah.
There could be like a family issue. I've had clients have terminal diagnoses. I've had clients die. Life can get in the way of a lot of things, or someone loses their job, or they decide to move, or, there's like a million reasons why something might not move forward, unfortunately. So yeah, there has to be that reality check though of like, if this moves forward, you have to be committed to it, and here's what it's going to cost, and you have to be realistic about that.
Yeah.
It can't be I saw it on HGTV and they did this for $15,000. Like, no.
Yeah.
Not going to happen.
No.